The singing Colossus of Memnon, when a black king spoke at dawn. There was once a statue in Egypt that spoke to the rising sun. Not in poetry, not in metaphor. It produced a voice, an eerie sound that emerged from stone as the morning light crossed the Nile. Travelers came from across the ancient world to hear it. Generals, governors, poets, and emperors stood beneath its enormous shadow, waiting for sunrise. Some heard a whistle. Some heard the snapping of lyre strings. Others described the sound as metal being struck deep inside the earth. But those who believed in the old stories heard something else. They heard a son calling for his mother. They heard the voice of Memnon, the black king who fought Achilles and was mourned by the goddess of dawn. This is the story of how an Egyptian pharaoh's shattered monument became the living voice of an African hero. Part 1. The Giants of Amenhotep. More than 13 centuries before the Common Era, Pharaoh Amenhotep III ruled Kemet during one of its most prosperous ages. He did not present himself as a political ruler. Like other Nasuts, he stood between humanity and the divine order. His monuments were intended to preserve more than just his reputation. These were instruments of immortality. On the west bank of the Nile, opposite the living city of Thebes, Amenhotep constructed an enormous mortuary temple. Now, the east belonged to sunrise and life. The west belonged to sunset, death, and the kingdom beyond. At the entrance of this sacred complex, two giant seated images of Amenhotep were raised from quartz stone. Each stood approximately 60 feet tall. Their hands rested upon their knees. Their faces looked eastward, toward the Nile and the rising sun. Beside the pharaoh's legs appeared the women of his royal family, including his powerful royal wife, Queen Tahi. To anyone approaching the temple, the message was unmistakable. The king remained on his throne. Even death could not remove him. But time is another kind of ruler. Time weakened the temple. Stone was taken and reused, walls disappeared, courts collapsed. The greatest mortuary complex of its age slowly became a field of ruins. Yet the two-seated giants remain. They survived long for their original meaning to have become obscured, and for another king to claim parts of their bodies. Part 2. Memnon, King of Ethiopia. Long before Amenhotep's monument was built, Greek storytellers spoke of another magnificent African king. His name was Memnon. Memnon was king of Ethiopia, the distant land Greek tradition associated with the dark-skinned people living towards the edge of the known world. His father was the mortal king Tithonus. His mother was no mortal woman. She was Eos, the goddess of the dawn. Every morning, Eos opened the gates to heaven. Rosy light spread across the sky as she announced the coming of the sun. But behind the beauty of every dawn lived the sorrow of a mother who knew that divine blood could not completely protect her son from mortal fate. When the Trojan War entered its final and bloodiest days, Memnon came to defend Troy. He did not arrive as an assistant, a servant, or a wandering mercenary. He came as a king at the head of an army, wearing divine armor forged by Hephaestus. On the battlefield, Memnon proved himself to be one of the greatest warriors alive. He killed the beloved son of Nestor, but the victory brought him into direct contact with the greatest fighter in the Greek army, Achilles. The son of dawn now stood against the son of the sea. Memnon, child of Eos. Achilles, child of Thetis. Two warriors born from goddesses. Two mothers watching from the divine world. two sons whose greatness could not save them from fate. The battle was so evenly matched that Zeus weighed their destinies upon his golden scales. Memnon's fate descended. Achilles struck the fatal blow. And when Memnon fell, Eos filled the morning sky with grief. Some traditions say her tears became the dew that appears at dawn. Others say she begged Zeus to grant her son immortality. Memnon's companions were transformed into birds that gathered above his tombs, fighting and mourning in his memory. Memnon died, but he did not disappear. His name crossed oceans, kingdoms, and generations. Eventually, it reached Kemet. Part 3. The earthquake that opened the stone. In 27 BCE, an earthquake struck the region around Thebes. The northern Colossus was torn apart. Its upper body collapsed, and the deep fracture opened through the remaining stone. The statue survived, but it was no longer whole. Then, after the destruction, something extraordinary began to happen. At dawn, the broken Colossus produced a sound. Perhaps moisture collected inside the damaged stone during the cool night. Perhaps the first warmth of morning caused the rock to expand, forcing air through its fractures. That may explain how the sound was created. It does not explain what the sound meant to those who heard it. Greek and Roman visitors saw an ancient African giant facing the eastern horizon, then heard its voice when Eos appeared in the morning sky. To them, the figure could only be Memnon. The broken statue had become the dead king's body. The sunrise was the arrival of his mother. And the mysterious sound was a brief moment each morning when the murdered son answered her. Amenhotep had created the monument. The earthquake had opened its mouth. But mythology gave it a voice. Part 4. The Voice of the Dawn. News of the singing statue spread throughout the Roman world. Travelers journeyed to Thebes, hoping to hear the miracle for themselves. They waited in the darkness before sunrise. Then came the sound. Some visitors carved inscriptions into the monument, reading the date and announcing that Memnon had spoken to them. Hearing the voice became a sign of divine favor. The statue was treated almost like an oracle. If Memnon answered while you were present, perhaps the gods had acknowledged you. Even emperors came. When Emperor Hadrian visited Egypt in roughly 130, members of his imperial party approached the Colossus. Among them was a poet who commemorated the encounter in verse upon the monument itself. The ruined temple had become something it was never designed to be. It was no longer a simple place where Amenhotep III was remembered. It became a meeting place between ancient Kemet, Greece, and Rome, between engineering and accident, history and mythology, death and reconstruction. Every morning recreated the same sacred drama. Eos returned, Memnon answered, and for one fleeting moment, the barrier between the living and the dead appeared to break. Part 5. When Rome silenced the miracle. Centuries after the earthquake, the North Colossus was repaired. The restoration is traditionally associated with the Roman Emperor Severus. Massive blocks were placed upon the damaged statue, rebuilding the upper portion that had collapsed. Rome attempted to honor the ancient monument, but the repairs changed it. The fractures were closed, the pressure within the stone shifted. Whatever combination of heat, moisture, and broken rock had produced the mysterious sound no longer existed. The Colossus stopped singing. The emperor had restored the body and silenced the voice. There is something almost mythical in that ending. The statue spoke while it was broken, but once it became whole, it was once again mute. Its voice had not come from perfection, its voice had come from the wound. Part 6. The King Inside the King. The figure seated beside the Nile was always Amenhotep III. The Egyptians did not build a statue of Memnon, and the monument existed centuries before the Greek accounts of the Trojan War were even written down. Historically, calling it Memnon is a case of mistaken identity. Mythically, however, something more important and more powerful occurred. One black king was remembered through the body of another. Amenhotep III supplied the stone, the colossal image of the African kingship facing the rising sun. Memnon supplied the story, the fallen African warrior whose divine mother returned every morning to mourn him. The earthquake joined them. Inside that single monument lived two forms of immortality. Amenhotep attempted to conquer death through architecture. Memnon conquered death through memory. The statue endured because of stone. The hero endured because people continued telling his story. And when the two became joined, the monument accomplished something neither history nor mythology could have accomplished alone. It spoke. Not forever, only at dawn, only while broken, only long enough to convince generations of witnesses that the dead could still answer when someone who loved them called. The singing Colossus of Memnon reminds us that monuments do not always keep the meaning that the creators give them. Civilizations fall, names are forgotten, gods cross borders. Stories take possession of ruins. But sometimes, through accident, memory, and belief, a forgotten monument receives a second life. For centuries, as the sun rose above the Nile, travelers stood beneath an African giant and listened. Some heard heated stone, some heard escaping air, but those who understood the power of the myth heard something greater. A fallen black king greeting his mother, and the dawn answering with tears.